First of all, I have already said we are very happy with you here with us, and you as a participant of our group, but as also someone who can advise us. And this is very important for us. You have already seen our rapport, and I think you were happy with it. We have made very nice commentaries, and we were also very happy with them. But you continue till the next year to be our consultant, and you participate also in the final conference. Then we have at least one more possibility or two more possibilities of seeing you really here in Lisbon.
That'll be wonderful. Thank you for that. Yeah, and thank you for I look forward to our meeting tomorrow and discussing the way the project is going. Okay. And yeah, just I was so impressed with the amount of work and the variety of things that are part of it, and I feel very honoured to be part of that project and involved with that. So thank you so much.
Thank you also. Thank you very much. Now you can introduce our guest. Yes, and our friend, our colleague friend.
It's my pleasure to introduce Graeme Gilloch, who is a colleague and a friend working with us already since 2018 or 2017. The first time you came here, I think it was 2017, something like that, for a seminar. Who was already in the framework of this research project, but was previous to its official starting point. So we had this seminar that's, on a certain sense, was preparing this funded project already. He has contributed to a book which was not published yet. It's really late, but we are preparing it. It will come out in the next months. And Graeme Gilloch is a professor at the sociology department at Lancaster University. And the principal focus of Graeme's academic work is the sociology of culture and the theory of culture. He has written, and particularly in the scholars associated with the Frankfurt School, such as Walter Benjamin and Siegfried Kracauer, and he has published 2 monographs on Benjamin, and in 2015 the monograph also on Kracauer, our companion in misfortune, who is a really important and even original in English language book on Kracauer. An author who's also part of the title of your lecture, isn't it? Related to those who wait now. And it's interesting how the issue of waiting is also very contemporary, because we were talking about these indecisions and this these strange times that we're living today, and it's part of this idea of waiting. So Graeme is working on several topics related to critical theory and theory of culture, and he's been working with us in these topics related with the city, the urban architecture, and even the relationship between the city and the arts, cinema, literature. And Graeme has been publishing and teaching in several of these topics. And today we are having this lecture. Entitled, Cat and Mouse. I forgot the full name. Sorry. Cat
and Mouse coming nach Haus.
Coming nach Haus.
Wait in Marseille. Yeah.
Marseille. So we are traveling to Marseille today, guided by our by Graeme Gilloch. Thank you very much for being with us here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nelio, and thank you, Professor Mulder. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you for the invitation. And this is a particularly, kind of appropriate moment, I suppose, to talk about those who are on the move and those who are not on the move, those who would like to be on the move and those who are caught or stuck in one place. I'm going to try. I'm not a very good Zoom person, but I'm going to try sharing my screen, and I hope that will work. And I'm going to use just some PowerPoint slides, which I hope you can all see. And I'm actually going to, I hope you don't mind it, I'm going to read the paper, and I'm going to jump straight in. The paper's KATZ und MAUS kommen nach HAUS, those who wait and wait and wait in Marseille. Let's see if I can move the slides on. Yeah.
It's moving, it's okay.
It's moving, good. Thank you. Okay, let's begin. Enter fleeing. Again and again in Shakespeare, in Calderon, battles fill the last act, and kings, princes, attendants, and followers enter fleeing. The moment in which they become visible to spectators brings them to a standstill. The flight of the dramatis personae is arrested by the stage. Their entry into the visual field of non-participating and truly impartial persons allows the harassed to draw breath, bathes them in a new air. The appearance on stage of those who enter fleeing takes from this its hidden meaning. Our reading of this formula is imbued with expectation of a place, a light, a footlight glare, in which our flight through life may be likewise sheltered in the presence of onlooking strangers. I'm reminded of this fragment while watching Transit, Christian Petzold's 2018 film based on an Anna Seghers quasi-autobiographical 1944 novel recounting the desperate experiences of refugees seeking to escape occupied France some 4 years earlier. But it's not only the dramatis personae, the characters on screen, that are pictured in flight, scurrying hither and thither in the desperate search for the paperwork that might just save them. We, the viewers of the film, are also ushered unceremoniously into this world, thrown pell-mell into cities, first Paris, then Marseille, cities which are definitely contemporary, yet simultaneously decidedly obsolete. These are cities in which the past and present curiously coalesce, coexist, cities that are, as a result, strangely familiar, uncanny. And we, the viewers, are unprepared, uninitiated. Unlike Michael Curtiz's Casablanca from 1942, the film with which Transit is rightly, albeit routinely, compared, there is no time for introduction here. There is no voiceover recounting what has befallen these people. There is no map depicting their route and way stations. There is no recitation of their current predicament, no somber repetition that they can do nothing but wait and wait and wait. No, there is nothing of this in Transit. We, the viewers, have no chance to get our bearings, are not allowed a moment or two to take stock, to get settled, to comprehend the who, the where, and the wherefore of what is going on. We join the action in media res. We enter reeling, running, on the run, out of breath. We arrive at the scene ongoing. We too need to get going. To the accompaniment of French police sirens, we join Georg, our protagonist, the narrator, who remains anonymous in Seghers' book, in a Parisian bar, the Bar Tabac La Française, just as you're joined by a journalist, Paul, again unnamed in the film. There are no explanations as to what has happened or why they are here, only an entreaty as to what to do next. Deliver a couple of letters to Paul's friend Weidel, a well-known writer who is staying at the nearby Hotel Riyadh, room 6. They speak German. They are all emigres, exiles, escapees for reasons best left unsaid. Georg finishes his coffee and heads to the hotel. Finding no one at reception, he goes up to Weidel's room where the hotel owner's daughter is nervously trying to clean up. She is suspicious. Are you German? From the occupying authorities? Georg asks for a room, one with, quote, a little morning sun and birds in the garden, please. Edging closer, he repeats the phrase, and we realize that it is a password of some kind, a signal. We are in a city of watchwords, of conspiracies. The woman does not or pretends not to understand. For her, Vidal has been nothing but a nuisance from the moment he arrived. And now this, Vidal has committed suicide, slashed his wrists. The bathroom is spattered with the blood. Georg leaves with what Vidal has left behind, all that remains of him, a passport of the German Reich, the manuscript of a story, and yet more letters, all placed into a small briefcase. Returning to the bar to rendezvous again with Paul, Georg runs into a police search. Paul is one of those lined up against the wall. Georg punches a police officer and makes a run for it. He hides and eludes the police searching as a helicopter scans the surroundings. He goes to the apartment where his friend Heinz is being cared for by Claire. Heinz? Claire? We learn nothing of them. Only that Heinz has a septic leg wound. He cannot be moved, and yet he must be moved. Cannot, but must. This paradox is central to the whole film. There is a plan. Under the cover of darkness, Georg and Heinz are driven to the goods yards where they manage to scramble onto and into an empty freight wagon. The 4-day journey south to Marseilles. While tending to his injured friend, Georg reads the manuscript, the letters, the two given him by Paul, one from Vidal's wife, Marie. Their life together was over, he reads. One from the Mexican consulate in Marseille, agreeing to issue him a residence visa. And then the two he found in Vidal's hotel room. One from his publisher, yes, the manuscript is very good, but please understand, such things cannot be published these days. The other is a confused letter from his wife, this time urging her husband to join her in Marseille. Let us begin a new life together in Mexico. Marie, above all, hurry, no time to lose. We will return to this moment of reading. For now, we must press on. Heinz will be dead before the train arrives at the goods depot outside Marseille. For Georg, there is no time for sentiment, for goodbyes. Evading yet more searching guards, he jumps down, hides behind another wagon, and runs as the corpse is discovered and unceremoniously thrown out onto the tracks. As the traffic speeds past on the coast road, he heads towards the city on foot. The city's hilltop cathedral becomes visible in the distance. Wait and wait and wait, intones the voice in Casablanca. But as transit opens in Paris, there is no time to waste. We enter fleeing, we exit fleeing. The waiting game starts later. It starts here in Marseille. Those who enter fleeing are not just out of place, anatopic figures, but they are also out of time, anachronistic. Transit is a film of disorientation and dislocation, of imposters and impersonations, fakes and falsifications. Times, places, characters, indeed film itself are not what they seem to be. They are now one thing, now another. They are counterfeits and counterfactuals. There are games to play and being played out. The deceptive one of charades, the deadly one of cat and mouse, the disquieting one of hide and seek, and the perplexing one of spot the difference. Everyone is playing acting, no one is themselves. And this is true above all of the cities to which we are transported and from whence the fugitives seek to escape, Paris and Marseille. For in Petzold's film, we find ourselves not in the Paris of today, nor in the Paris of Seghers' time. This is not a period piece, a costume drama, but rather in a neither nor city or a both and city, a somewhere else altogether, an elsewhere, an urban alibi. The near future disguised as the recent past. Let me be clear. This has nothing to do with the calico world of film industry studio sets, like the faux North African trappings of Casablanca and its monochromatic Morocco, or today's green screen digital projections. No, transit is shot on location in Paris, in Marseille, in the here and now. These are 21st century cityscapes, our cities, almost, virtually, or rather virtual-less. Yes, they are our cities today, but they have been shorn most notably of the everyday technological infrastructures and affordances that can characterize our lives. This is today, or rather tomorrow, reimagined as a pre-computer, digital-free world. Those who enter fleeing in transit do so bereft of ICTs. They are app-less. Mobile phones have vanished, and in their stead perhaps are the coin-operated payphones and booths of yesteryear. In the absence of laptops, the writer Vidal has been tapping away on a typewriter to produce page after page of typescript. Documents are delivered by hand. Hard copies are, well, just copies. What other kind could there possibly be? Pieces of paper are issued, required, scrutinized with stamps and seals and signatures. There are no emails, no uploads, no downloads, no scans, no QR codes, no online this, no online that. A wallet is just what you carry your cash in. No credit cards to swipe. A tablet is something you swallow. In Seghers' novel, tablets is what Vidal himself has swallowed. This is Seghers' time and world. It is a time of European borders that cannot be crossed without permits and visas. It is a world where to travel, to escape, you must book a passage on a transatlantic liner rather than head for the airport or for the Eurostar. All these absences are essential for the narrative to work, to make sense. We must suspend our disbelief. And then there is the German occupation, the fascist forces that are imminent and before which one must flee. This is Paris and Marseille, 1940, 1941, but it is happening now. It is as if the figures from Casablanca with their 1940s mannerisms, habits, and now wholly obsolete technologies had taken a step backwards on their perilous escape route from the Nazi occupation, taken a step back to Marseille, while simultaneously leaping forwards in time, traversing decades to the present. But only then to find themselves 80 years later, still fleeing fascist powers, as if they had been waiting all that time only to discover that they had still not yet managed to outrun the enemy, complicit and conniving French authorities forsaking peaked caps for body armor, pistols for semi-automatics, open-top limousines for wailing, screeching transits with blackened windows, helicopters circling overhead. They have gone back to the future and we have gone forwards to the past. We all arrived together simultaneously in Vichy 2.0. It is as if cities and times were playing elaborate games of hide and seek within others. Paris 1940 and Marseille 1941, in Paris, Marseille 2018, now imagined as Paris and Marseille in maybe 2025. And this returns us to Benjamin. It is, of course, Benjamin who, in Moscow in the winter of 1926-27, notes that this snow-covered, ice-bound, revolutionary city, the traditional Russian village, the Asiatic, as he terms it in a play on the name of his lover, Asia Lakish, the Asiatic is to be discovered, nestling here and there in the nooks and crannies of this city. This is also as much temporal as well as spatial. The past, the archaic, peeping out from in amongst not just the modern, but for Benjamin, the most modern, the revolutionary, the very newest of the new, the shape of things to come. Benjamin, of course, writes 2 essays on Marseille during the 1920s and was not only a compatriot and fellow refugee, but also a friend of Seghers. But for me, it is Moscow that provides the initial conceptual key to transit. It is here in the new Soviet capital that Benjamin bears witness to precisely the myriad juxtapositions of and disjunctures between the old and the new, the constitution and configuration of a kaleidoscopic urban temporal montage, a chronological constellation. Wintry Moscow is the epitome of a city of incessant motion and complete stasis, simultaneously revolutionary and at the same time frozen. All this he understands in a concept that is, for me, the best way to capture the cityscapes of Petzold's film, Seichas, or time collisions. Benjamin writes, in his use of time, the Russian will remain Asiatic longest of all. The real-time unit of time is the Seichas. This means at once. You can hear it 10, 20, 30 times and wait hours, days, or weeks until the promise is carried out. By the same token, you seldom hear the answer, no. Negative replies are left to time. Time catastrophes, time collisions are therefore as much the order of the day as remords. They make each hour superabundant, each day exhausting, each life a moment. Petzold's film presents us precisely with such time collisions or time catastrophes, the interpenetration, or to use a more recent phrase, mashup of past and present, of digital and non or pre-digital worlds, and much more besides. As in Moscow, so in transit, time collisions appear as the conflicting and contrasting impulses and tempos to which we bear witness. Most importantly, the pressing need to flee, to make haste, to escape immediately, at once. And at the same time, the longueurs of waiting and inaction, the days and weeks of boredom and exhaustion. Seichas, this captures the urgent imperative to flee France and the very impossibility of doing so, a refusal left to time, to the very contradiction of being in transit. For in transit, the film, to be in transit is not to be conflated with being in motion. No, to be in transit is to be arrested in the process of transition, to be found in a moment of the very interruption of movement. Like the characters who pause fleetingly to utter their few lines on stage as they enter fleeing, or like a fly caught and suspended in flight, still struggling in a spider's web. To be in transit is to be going nowhere in a hurry, though hurry one must. For such waiting is not to be misunderstood as doing nothing, idling. There is no time for that. Indeed, in Marseilles, there is much to be done. First things first, Georg visits Melissa, the girlfriend and now widow of his friend Heinz, and meets their young son, Driss, in the city's banlieue. Driss, whose eclectic German consists, he says, only of shit, 1-2 pass, and Borussia Dortmund, though he too is lying or just being cagey. His German is much better and more extensive than this. Driss, with whom Georg plays football in the street, repairs an old-fashioned but not old transistor radio. Driss, who in another play of identities wears on the back of his football shirt a name redolent of Casablanca, just in case we had forgotten, Rick. And then the convolutions and complexities of the story start to intensify. When he is mistaken for Vidal at the Mexican embassy, Georg sees a fortuitous escape route open up before him. Yes, he's welcome to live in Mexico, and here are the visas and some much needed money, but he has 3 weeks to get the transits he needs for the journey, for the ports of call, America and Spain. The ship sails on the 23rd, he is told, though we have no idea which month we are in. And most importantly, Georg encounters Marie, the estranged wife and now widow of Vidal, the writer, the man whose case and papers Georg continues to carry, the man whose identity Georg now assumes, steals, borrows. I use the word encounters cautiously here. It is more that Marie importunes Georg by mistake, not once, but 3 times, thinking him her husband, seen from behind, in a state of expectancy. There is perhaps a resemblance. Marie comes and goes, rushes over and hurries away. One wonders if she is real or an imaginary figure, a ghost, a troubled, troublesome spirit. She is to Georg and Marseille what Nadia is to Breton and Paris, the one who haunts. And Marie is herself haunted. She is searching for a husband who, she has learned, has arrived in Marseille. But she always just misses him, always arrives just a fraction too late, zu spät gekommen. She feels as if some exasperating game of urban hide and seek is afoot. Marie's motivations are not necessarily conjugal and romantic. She has become the loveless lover of the doctor, Richard, the very same doctor Georg will fetch to attend to the asthmatic Driss, a doctor who has his own Mexican plans and a visa and a ticket for himself and only himself for the good ship Esperanza next Tuesday. Marie needs her own visa to accompany him. That is why she wrote to her husband, the very letter Georg was to deliver. And there is another ghost as well. As Georg reads Weidel's typescript back on the train, a voiceover suddenly and surprisingly intervenes, telling us his inner thoughts and emotions. This is not Georg's voice, but that of another, someone who later claims to meet Georg for the first time only in the Café Montvertu in Marseille. Though as these words are spoken, Georg sits alone, facing a pair of empty seats across the table. In time, we will learn that this narrator is none other than the patron of the cafe. But the question as to how he has come to learn of Georg's intimate world remains unasked and unanswered. This voiceover will simply come and go, articulating the feelings of a man who has hitherto seemed largely immune to feeling. Immune until he meets Driss, that is. Immune above all until he meets Marie. He is drawn to her, she to him. They become close, they become lovers, or so it seems to those in the Café Montvertu who observe them, our narrator among them. But they are mistaken, or at least premature. Yes, they hold hands. Yes, they embrace. But Marie is seeking a reconciliation with her husband and does not believe Georg when he tells her that Weidel is dead. No, that cannot be, she replies, since he has been seen here in Marseille. He has collected the visas. Here, Georg's truthful words are contradicted by the very duplicity of his own actions. A plan is agreed. Richard will leave on the Esperanza, and Georg and Marie will follow a week later on the Montreal, only for things to go awry. Richard is ejected from the ship before it sails to make room for some other passengers, French officers. He is unexpectedly thrown off the Hope. While the doctor now sinks into despair, Georg and Marie still plan to escape together. Finally, it is time. They head together to the port and the ship, the Montreal, that will save them, though it will do no such thing. But we are rushing ahead. We should take a moment to consider and reflect upon the cityscape we are invited to tour as we accompany Georg on his various appointments and assignations. In following him on his flâneries around Marseille, we become intimate with, inmates of, the very spaces of waiting and inertia he must endure, the corridors and stairwells of embassies and consulates with their anxious queues snaking and winding around columns and pillars, with their crowds all clutching numbered tickets, each of them all too ready to confide their sad tales to anyone within earshot, momentary companions in misfortune, whose added misfortune it is to have to listen. In the Mexican consulate, Georg's initial impatience with the orchestral conductor bound for Caracas, and then with the architect, the woman with the dogs, both of them ghosts in the making, is tempered when he reflects, so the voiceover informs us, that Marseille is a port, and a port is where people tell stories. Georg has no time for writers like Weidel, like Paul, and it is for them that he retains his contempt. Storytellers, though, have lived through and feel compelled to recount their experiences. Theirs is a confessional imperative and necessity. For writers, so Georg reckons, experiences are, by contrast, only ever so much raw material to be turned into text, grist to their word mills, like tourists, for whom visiting beautiful or historic sites is primarily for the photo opportunity. And so the brief panorama as the camera pans the face of the crowd thronging the Mexican consulate is that of a gathering of storytellers. And I wonder, is there a collective noun for storytellers? A choir perhaps, or a chorus? A gathering of storytellers that the camera pans across, transforming it into a soundscape, a storyscape, a kind of momentary ad hoc oral library. And these stories will remain unwritten. They will soon vanish. They only ever enter fleeing. Marseille is an unhomely home to all such stranded storytellers and their one-time only tales. Away from the embassies we frequent, as Gilloch does, away from the embassies we frequent, as Gilloch does, various bars and cafes, spaces to measure out one's life in coffee spoons. We visit cheap hotels, hotels like the Nouvelle Hotel Capucine, too mean or too miserable, or both, to provide comfortable lobbies for their down-at-heel guests, the kind of palm-filled hotel lobbies that Siegfried Kracauer identifies as a characteristic setting for the unfolding of events in his 1922-25 treatise, Detektivroman. His description, though, is apt for those in transit. The hotel lobby, he writes, accommodates all those who go there to meet no one. It is a setting for those who neither seek nor find the one who is always sought, and who are therefore guests in space as such, a space that encompasses them and has no other function than to encompass them. In such lobbies, there are no stories. This is a locus bereft of meaning, home to gossip, chatter, and tittle-tattle, in short, to language emptied of significance, and to characters who have no sense of themselves or others, as deeply ensconced in their own alienation as they are in their padded armchairs. Kracauer writes, remnants of individuals slip into the nirvana of relaxation. Faces disappear behind newspapers, and the artificial continuous light illuminates nothing but mannequins. It is the coming and going of unfamiliar people who have become empty forms because they have lost their password and who now file by as ungraspable flat ghosts. In the absence of such lobbies, vacuous but luxurious, other sites must suffice for lingering. Damp hallways, cramped entrances, tiny foyers, counter spaces. Petzold's film is a topography of such improvised waiting rooms where one waits when the waiting rooms themselves are full, the overspill of waiting, encampments. We are treated to a city of such thresholds and in-between spaces, Schwellen and Zwischenräume. These are not even Marc Auger's non-places. They are the gaps, the stop gaps between non-places. They are not the last spaces, as Kracauer might say, but the last spaces before the last. These are the momentary refuges of those in search of refuge, those without shelter who here in Marseille come up against the employees of bureaucracies, those spiritually shelterless white-collar workers identified and explored by Kracauer in his 1929 Berlin ethnography, Die Angestellten. Those who are in transit, those who are in search of transits, collide here with the intransigent, the inertia and awkwardness of authorities, offices, and officials, the triumph of the ratio, as Kracauer sees it, manifested in all its chilly indifference and impersonality. Pen pushing, form filling, copying out this, checking that, stamps, signatures, validations. Those who wait are inserted into, processed through, and accredited by this paperwork panopticon, if they are lucky, that is. If they are lucky like Gilloch, whose own expedited passage through the Byzantine bureaucratic world is due to misrecognition and malfunctioning by the functionaries, a Mexican mix-up. At least here there is room for human error, precisely the kind of felicitous failings that the digital algorithms and biometrics of our world today are intended to eradicate. Seichas, even in its most banal usage, involves, as Benjamin tells us, a kind of everyday diplomacy. Yes, at once means never, but the questioner is spared the definitive refusal. Seichas is surely the official language of bureaucracy, of those who make you wait for the at once to become the now, those who leave you hanging around hopelessly full of hope until you give up and you go away, or you are taken away. Transit, a stopover. Transit, a bureaucratic document, a paradox. You are allowed in only because you can prove that you will not be staying, like the hotel, the Nouveau Hotel de Capuchin, only writ large. And however much one hurries, one is never punctual. Georg flees south overnight from Paris at the very last moment. In Marseille, he must pass the days frantically, fretfully, until his ship, vital ship that is, the Montreal, is due to depart. And then, on the day of embarkation, things do not go to plan. With transits in hand, our lovers, our almost lovers, with transits in hand and entwined on the backseat of a taxi, speeding them to the harbour and the ship in good time, the love story Georg imagined himself to be in, is revealed for what it is, another mix-up, another misunderstanding, another counterfeit. Marie imagines surprising her husband, vital by the railings on the deck of the ship. How amazed, how happy he will be, how she hopes her husband, Georg, will become good friends with, she hopes her husband and Georg will become good friends. Realizing his mistake, Georg gets out of the cab, runs to Richard's apartment, and in an echo of Rick's self-sacrificial gesture in Casablanca, gives all the visas and transits to him. Richard sets off to the harbour. However much he hurries and scurries around Marseille, however close he gets to departure, Georg will never quite make it to the boat. And in so doing, or rather by failing to do so, he saves himself. The Montreal is destined to hit a mine and sink with all its crew and passengers, Marie among them. Or was she? Because Georg has seen her flit in and out of the Mont Berthaud as he sits at the bar, drowning his sorrows. Georg waits and waits and waits, and then is destined never to arrive. He's not so much a walking Zeno's paradox as a hurrying one. Whatever he does, however much he quickens his pace, Georg never quite gets there. He is never in time, always out of kilter, an anachronism even here among all these anachronisms. To emphasize the point, we learn his occupation. He's a radio and television technician, a repairman. One wonders, who would have need of him now? His training that he was not given time to complete was an apprenticeship in obsolescence. Here in Marseille, those who enter fleeing in Benjamin's formulation and those who wait in crack hours become one and the same. And this is as it should be, for these are conceived not in relation to refugees and exiles in particular, but rather as existential conditions, albeit ones intensified by the alienation and the spiritual shelterlessness of modern metropolitan life and the disenchanted world of today. While in Der Tiefroman, Krakow compares the meaningfulness of the church congregation to the profane purposelessness of the hotel lobby, Benjamin goes a step further and writes in his 1928 essay on Marseille of how the city's cathedral, the Notre Dame de la Gare, the one seen as Georg trudges from the goods yard, resembles nothing more than a gigantic railway station, a pun here on the word gare, with its own waiting rooms for passengers of the first to fourth classes, although before God they are all equal, wedged among their spiritual possessions as if between suitcases. Here, Benjamin says, prayer books, confessionals and masses come to resemble international timetables, ticket offices, departure and arrival boards. This is the Marseille religion station, Benjamin notes, offering sleeping car reservations to the hereafter, though this comes as precious comfort for poor Heinz, who was unable to travel even fourth class. How might one characterize the cinematic odyssey around Marseille that Petzold takes us on in the company of Gilloch. Where does this film lead us? It leads us to film itself, to where Benjamin famously writes, "Our bars and city streets, our offices and furnished rooms, our railroad stations and our factories seemed to close relentlessly around us. Then came film and exploded this prison world with the dynamite of the split second, so that now we can set off calmly on journeys of adventure among its far-flung debris. In transit, we have looked in upon all these drab and dreary spaces, and they have been subject to various small detonations, the myriad explosions resulting from all the time collisions that occupy and destabilize them. These perhaps go unheard because drowned out by the incessant wailing of the police sirens, reiterating the unrelenting state of emergency in this prison world. And the film ends with an unseen explosion, not of the dynamite of the split second itself, another Seychelles, perhaps, another all at once, transforming the cityscape, subjecting the urban dream world to ruination, to mortification, creating thereby new spaces for the new. No, not an explosion like that, nothing like that. Rather, the explosion of a mine at sea, something lethal one runs into like a spider's web, seeking the Montreal and adding yet another catastrophe to all those other, albeit smaller, more personal catastrophes that have piled up already, one upon the other. Exile, persecution, suicide, arrest, violence, injury, death, treachery, betrayal, sickness, and not forgetting itself. Who remembers, the Mexican consul asks, the erstwhile lover who leaves or the now unloved one who is left behind? A question later repeated verbatim by Marie, as if this too was some kind of watchword, a password, a secret code. Perhaps the question is only rhetorical, for in this world, no one gets to leave, except those who go one way on those sleeping cars to eternity, departing at mass times from Marseille Cathedral. There are, of course, other explosive moments in Benjamin's writings, most notably, of course, in his 1940 thesis on the concept of history, where the task of the historical materialist is to blast open the continuum of history. And it is to these theses that, for me, Petzold's film finally takes us. Indeed, bears witness as assuredly as it does to Seghers' novel, written just 4 years later. For transit is not just a composition of cinematic images, it is a constellation of, or perhaps better, a construction site for dialectical images. Benjamin's fundamental epistemological, methodological concept and his imperative for the historical materialist, the genuine historian. History breaks down into images, Benjamin tells us, and perhaps this film screens some of them. People and things in flight, caught in flight, arrested, figures brought to a standstill, past and present intersecting, interrupting, interacting, interfering, time collisions, time catastrophes, the then and there in tension with the here and now, former and future states of emergency superimposed one upon the other, the now that must be made at once but is endlessly deferred, moments of mutual recognition and recognizability dispersed in time and space, gaps between, spaces of separation as force fields of possibility and necessity, flashes of illumination, perhaps not as Benjaminian lightning strikes, but as the dazzling glare of the Mediterranean sunlight reflected fleetingly as a window opens, as a window closes, or momentarily caught in the footlights of a theatrical stage. Quote, the true image of the past flits by. The past can be seized only as an image that flashes up at the moment of its recognizability and is never seen again, unquote. In other words, such an image always and only ever enters fleeing. Here, the full significance of Benjamin's fragment from One Way Street becomes apparent. It is not just a thought image, denk-built, of the existential human condition, but also the first formulation, perhaps the very inspiration of the dialectical image. Such an image is both past and in passing. As the encounter of what was and what is, it is a veritable time collision. And as such, it is endangered, threatened with oblivion or worse, co-option, and only manifests itself in a present moment of danger. Benjamin insists, the danger threatens both the content of the tradition and those who inherit it. For both, it is one and the same thing, the danger of becoming a tool of the ruling class. Every age must strive anew to wrest tradition away from the conformism that is working to overpower it. The Messiah comes not only as the Redeemer, he comes as the victor over the Antichrist. The only historian capable of fanning the spark of hope in the past is the one who's firmly convinced that even the dead will not be safe from the enemy if he is victorious. And this enemy has never ceased to be victorious. This tradition, the tradition of the oppressed, is instructive, Benjamin tells us. It, quote, teaches us that the state of emergency in which we live is not the exception, but the rule. We must attain to a conception of history that accords with this insight. Then we will clearly see that it is our task to bring about a real state of emergency, and this will improve our position in the struggle against fascism, unquote. Though we live today in a state of emergency, that fascism has not ceased to be victorious, that the struggle for both the present and the past is not just ongoing, but intensifying, that the enemy may still win if we are not vigilant, if we do not fight. For all this, transit is an urgent reminder. As Peter Conrad writes in his lucid introduction to the novel, what Seghers saw as an emergency has now become what we call normality. For no one watching transit today could be left in any doubt as to the resonance of its themes for our own catastrophic times. The desperation of persecuted populations, peoples in flight, seekers of asylum, sanctuary, confronted by walls and barbed wire, paramilitaries and vigilantes, closed borders, the purposely hostile environments of bureaucracies and authorities, the indifference or active animosity of hosts not deserving the name, rampant corruption, bribery and exploitation of the most vulnerable, squalid camps, perilous crossings, inevitable sinkings, drownings, unrecovered bodies. Gail makes one final visit to see Melissa and Driss, themselves illegals, but they have fled to the mountains and their apartment is now crowded with nervous, newly arrived immigrants, those who enter fleeing in the opposite direction. Fortress Europe, in the recent past, so many of its inhabitants found themselves hemmed in by the very border controls that shrill xenophobic voices now demand are rigorously policed. All this must be remembered too. And the task, the duty of fanning the spark of hope in the past belongs not only to the historian, but to the filmmaker. After all, such a spark is needed if the fuse for the explosives, the dynamite of the split second is to be lit. Transit ends with a glimmer of hope, with an uncharacteristic smile. Like Gail, we are witnesses to Marie's brief visitation to the Marc Vertu cafe after the ship has set sail. But is this a ghost? Is it an apparition? Is it a premonition? Even though her name is confirmed on the passenger list of the doomed ship, the Montreal, Georg waits for her in the cafe, waits for her to return once more. After all, Seghers writes, and the patron of the cafe says, Marie might turn up, the way shipwrecked people unexpectedly come ashore following some miraculous rescue, or like the shadow of a dead person who's been ripped from the underworld by sacrifices and fervent prayers. And it is during this waiting, perhaps, that he has told the patron his story so that he, in turn, can relate it to us. Georg waits expectantly, sitting in his usual spot, turning in his seat with every opening of the door. Georg waits and waits and waits, and he imagines her still seeking vital outside. Imagine her still walking, quote, imagine her still walking up and down the streets of the city, the squares and the stairs, the hotels and cafes and consulates, looking for her beloved, looking ceaselessly, not only here in this city, but in all the cities of Europe that I know, even in the fabled cities of other continents that I don't know. It's more likely that I'd get tired of waiting than she'd get tired of her search for a dead man who can't be found. That's how the novel ends. Georg waits for her even though she does not search for him, and he knows it too. As the paramilitary police sweep through the streets outside, as the so-called cleansing of the city of Marseille begins, Georg waits. He turns. There is the hint of a smile. Has she just walked in? Has she just come back? Has she finally come home to him? Perhaps. After all, more surprising twosomes and more surprising homecomings are the very stuff of Georg's childhood lullaby. Fuchs and Gans, not to mention KATZ und MAUS, kommen nach Haus. And lastly, hopefully, Mann und Frau kommen nach Haus. Die Lampen leuchten, der Tag ist aus. Thank you for listening. I'm going to stop my screen share.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was very fascinating, really. And
thank you.
Very instigating also to think about it. Now the questions and also commentaries and so on. Graeme, I have some. I have made some relationships with other presentations of hope in Benjamin, of hope of waiting in Benjamin, and also I have found a parallel between the concept of transit in the film and in your paper, in your lecture, with the transit camps, for instance, from Westerbork in Netherlands. I read a lot of Hetty Illesum, and she entered this camp of the transit in 42, July 42, and not as a voluntary, and then she could come and go, and almost 1 year, 1 year later, she decided not to go out anymore. She decided to be with the others who could never go out, and they were waiting. They were waiting. At the beginning, they did not know what they were waiting of, but sooner they discovered they were waiting for the next train to go to that camp. And this is very, very terrible. The idea of a transit camp, this idea, it is like coagulation or a starring of the transit in the film is like the case, the limit case, the case where there is no waiting in the sense, there is no hope at all. And about another sense of waiting we can find in Benjamin, also in the Passagewerk, when he compares the flaneur, the gambler, and the one who waits. And these three have a different relationship with time. In the first case, the gambler loses time, does not bother time at all. The flaneur accumulates time, but it does not do anything with this accumulation. It is a pure accumulation. And it does not explore also. It is like something osseous. And then the one who waits is producing time. But in the film, those who wait are not producing time. This is a difference. This is, in the sense, these are not really questions, but at the same time, they are an invitation to hear you about. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That's yeah. For me, I was really interested in the and you highlight those perfectly, the contradictions in this notion of transit and the word transit and the way in which transit and these are sort of spelled out. They're spelled out in the novel, but they're spelled out in different places. But they're spelled out by the encounter between Gilloch and the owner of the hotel in Marseille, where he's only allowed to stay because he doesn't want to stay. And there's this paradox of you're only allowed in because you're on your way out. And the transit is this peculiar kind of idea of being in transit. Then it's actually not in motion, but being of a stasis, of a stopover, of being stuck somewhere. And that's how I think, and the idea of the transit camp is, of course, is another paradox. The idea that you have a camp, which is a place that you end up, you end up being stuck rather than in motion.
Yes, it's like ironic. It is ironic and cruel at the same time.
It is absolutely. It is ironic. That's absolutely right. It is ironic and cruel. And so I wanted to think. I mean, and I thought about whether we could talk about Marseille as a kind of camp, as an entire city, as a sort of transit camp. I didn't want to go down that line particularly here in this paper, because that would lead on perhaps to talk about which perhaps we must talk about other transit camps, the transit camps that exist today, the transit camps in Calais, the transit camps that exist in many parts of Europe at the moment. So I mean, I kind of wanted to try and suggest that in the paper, but not go there fully in the paper, because I kind of felt that was another paper about. I think what I was trying to get at is this notion of a dialectical image. Then was this that this is about how the 1940s speak to us, and this is a way in which Petzold creates this tension between the past, this fleeing from fascism, and the present flight from, well, people fleeing from fascism as well, still, and conflict today. They mentioned, I mean, I'd mentioned the flaneur here, but you mentioned the gambler, which is wonderful, because I hadn't thought of the gambler in this connection at all. And of course, the gambler is precisely a figure who, the gambler is a sort of figure of again, a kind of temporal kind of vortex or confusion, because on the one hand, there's this kind of at once of the gambler. Again, a figure of the Seychelles in that sense, a figure of waiting, of standing at the roulette table or whatever. But each time it's a kind of, it's a new time, it's a new now moment. And also the concatenation of time as well, but time, the possibility of a fortune, which would take years to earn, the amount of money that's laid out on a table suddenly is available instantly or not at all. So there's this huge expansion of time and contraction of time that takes place in the gambling table. And I suppose that's what each of these figures is, in a way, is a kind of, they're gamblers all the time. I think that would be a really great way to think about this film, I've mentioned the notions of various kinds of play, cat and mouse, charades, etc. But maybe the game is, maybe it's much more about gambling. Maybe it's much more about the kind of stakes. And that would be another way of thinking about it, that this is a game of all or nothing, a kind of throw of the dice in some way. And that we could bring in that notion of the gambler into this. That would work really well, I think. That'd be really interesting. So thank you for those comments. They're fantastic. That's really helpful.
Thank you. More comments or questions?
I have a question, or maybe a comment. And thank you, Graeme, for bringing this film, which I think that it's a really interesting and fertile way to approach also the dialectical images, Benjamin and dialectical images, because it has so many different and complex elements that seem to not to exemplify, because it's difficult to say what exactly can exemplify a dialectical image, but it has all these clashes of temporal dimension, of spatial dimension, of imagetic elements. It's really good issue. I was just thinking about also this quotation that you brought from the work of art essay concerning the optical unconscious. It's this idea of journeys of adventure, which it's also kind of a certain utopic element, or at least an element of hope or of expectation concerning technologies. And I don't see that, because on one hand, this return of fascism that the film confronts us with brings an element which it's difficult also to think about journeys of adventure, of something that we can expect. I don't know if I'm thinking clearly, but there's in Benjaminian thinking, there's also these different elements playing together. This more hopeful for a journey of adventure, but also this more pessimistic elements of the returning of fascism, or returning of, I don't know, how do you also from a point of view, cultural point of view, or the times that we are facing, well, how would you consider this idea of a journey of adventure?
That's a great point, Nelia. Thank you for that. You're absolutely right that there's this idea of, in the work of art essay, in that passage where the kind of this dreary, drab prison world is swept away in somehow by film. That film kind of brings a new kind of illumination, a new spark, a new way of seeing whatever it means, that will sweep this away, that will reveal the city to us in a new way, or be the birth of a new kind of urban experience for us. In an earlier draft of this paper, I had the words Spielraum and Leibraum, these kinds of terms, that it creates a new urban, technical, embodied, temporal, spatial sensibility in some way. All these things coming together in the city, and this is what film promises, and this is what these kind of journeys of adventure, I think, that we may calmly go traveling. And I think what I really, one of the things that really struck me about Petzold's film is the way in which we are taken to these spaces, exactly these drab, dreary, everyday spaces in his film, in a very different state, in a state of alarm, in a state of anxiety, in a state of the very opposite of this sort of calm vision that Benjamin has. That we see this in the very state of emergency itself. And at the same time, I think what Benjamin is concerned with here is that we see the city differently, and I think that actually works nevertheless for this film, in that what's kind of really remarkable about the film is because it's shot actually in Paris and Marseille, and we actually see these background scenes. I was thinking about these background scenes, and what we actually see is we see the everyday life of these cities being played out in the background through the window of the cafe, or as he's walking along that scene where he's walking along the harbour for the first time and arriving in Marseille, and the cars are just driving past. You know? And we see these kind of everyday scenes, and yet we see them in a completely new way. We see them as part of this catastrophic world, this catastrophic experience. So the everyday is transformed for us. And it's as if the catastrophe and the everyday are playing a kind of hide and seek, I think, within the city. And that sort of presents us with, and that's sort of, I'm not explaining this very well, but for me, it creates, it also creates a new way of sort of thinking and seeing these spaces, yeah, that the everyday becomes part of the catastrophe. And I think this is where I would move away from this sort of techno-utopian whatever sort of vision that Benjamin articulates here to this much more catastrophic vision that we end up with in 1940, as Benjamin is himself in Marseille with Krakow and Seghers, all there at the same time, along with half of Europe's intellectuals. So I think it is about this way in which the city becomes a site of catastrophe. I know this is a theme that we've been looking at as well, as part of the project. The city is a site of catastrophe, but a catastrophe within the everyday, a catastrophe threaded through the everyday, and the everyday itself as kind of catastrophic, because it's about the new normal, as the introduction to the novel points out, that this is normality, and the normality is the catastrophe for us. So I think it envisages a kind of doppelganger to Benjamin's more utopian, calm adventures. Yeah. Or perhaps what it imagines is that these two exist together, even, that depending on who you are, you can walk through the city as the flaneur, you can have calm adventures, depending on who you are, depending on your ethnicity, depending upon your passport, depending upon your economic status. Yeah, but the very same city that one can walk through calmly, for others, it's a state of crisis, an emergency and catastrophe, depending upon having the wrong passport or no passport at all, or the wrong set of papers. So maybe it's these two things together. Maybe it's this calm, the seeming calm of a city that is just living its everyday life, and the catastrophe that's unfolding within it. Maybe these two things come together in the film, and that's what makes it such a disquieting film. Because I think one of the amazing things about it, how maybe it's something to do with my generation, because I talked about digital technologies, but for someone of my generation to be drawn into this world almost unproblematically, so you don't even notice the fact that they don't have mobile phones, you don't even notice the fact that they're not sorting out all their problems online, that they're not downloading their visas or whatever it is, uploading their COVID passes or whatever it is. You know, it's amazing how one is drawn into this world very easily, and it becomes, you know, I talk about sort of the suspense of disbelief, of course, is a sort of standard thing, but one feels very much immersed in this world, and that's I think that's down to this notion of enter fleeing at the beginning. We are suddenly in this bar, these characters are talking, we have no idea what's going on, we have no idea what they're talking about, but there we are in the middle of this world, and kind of like, okay. And I think Petzold does that sense of immediacy, I think is one of the really striking and brilliant features of the film. And the way in which characters are talked about, for instance. So suddenly we hear about, oh, are you going to join Henry in the mountains? No, I don't think so. And that's it. We never hear anything more about Henry. We never even find out the name of the character who drives them to the goods yards. We never find out about the Monsieur Langeron, who seems to be in charge of the Vichy kind of like regime. These things are all mentioned, but we never find out about any of them. We are just utterly drawn into this, the necessity and urgency of this world. So yeah, so that's a real ramble around your question, Leo. I'm sorry, but I think there's no time for the adventure here in a way. I do use the word flânerie, but these are frantic flânerie in this. Although at the same time, the time gets stretched out again because there's boredom as well. He says, you don't have much time. You have 3 weeks to get the transit visa. Well, what are you going to do in 3 weeks? Stand in the American consulate for 3 weeks. You know what are you going to do? And that's how there's this very. I think part of the brilliance of the film is this endless movement between haste and boredom, speed, the necessity of speed, and its impossibility at the same time. It's like being the need to enter fleeing, but the impossibility of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
More questions, more comments?
Yes. Hello.
Hi, Nuno. Lovely to see you again.
It's very nice to see you once again. And I'm sorry I arrived late because I had a problem with my PC, but I could listen to your excellent presentation. I thank you for that. And I also thank you for choosing this film that I didn't see and that I haven't seen before. I just saw it last week. And what I want to say is to share my experience of the film, because it is very disquieting, but it is also a new form of seeing a film and imagining a city. Because, of course, he shows us a city that he films in 2018, I think, or 2017. But we have to deal with our ideas of the historical city of Marseille and Paris, of course. And I think we are invited to create a third image, not what we are seeing on the screen, not what we know about history, but to join with our imagination and see an imagined city, like a third image on the screen. It was, at least it was my experience. So it was very, very interesting. I'm sure probably this is not the first film that does this, but for me it was something new to see in this way. So this is more like sharing my experience, but I also have a little question about Marseille and about Benjamin's Marseille and the Marseille that we are seeing on the screen, because I read it for some time now. But I had the idea that Marseille in the 20s was a wicked city, a city of danger. The danger that we see in this film is of a different character, and but we also see a very how do you say, a very solar city, the light of Marseille, which is Mediterranean light, is very beautiful, of course. So it is also a little bit strange to see this very solar city and imagine a darker city that we somehow can read in Benjamin. I'm not sure if this is a real question, but I would like to hear you about this different Marseille, the Benjaminian Marseille and the Petzold Marseille. So thank you.
Thank you, Nuno. That's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, that really links in with Nelio's
yes.
comments as well. So well. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that it's a really great way of describing it. This notion of a third city. This is the city. In the paper, I sort of call it a neither nor or a both and city. That it is not. First of all, it's not Seghers' city. It's not the 1940s. Although it's imbued with elements of that. We seem in some ways we seem to be in the 1940s, but we're not. And we're not in the present either. We're not in the city of today for all the reasons I've sort of talked about, the kind of absence of the digital, for instance, and various other things. So we're in a curious kind of hybrid city of space, which I said is a sort of urban alibi. And an alibi means, as we know, means elsewhere. So it is a somewhere else. It is a kind of urban elsewhere. And in that sense, it's an imagined space. Very much an imagined space, an imagined cinematic space. That is actually then projected into the future. So this is as I said, it's kind of like it's a past that's already future. Kind of when I was writing this, I was thinking, I was trying to work out one of my favorite concepts is from Roland Barthes, the idea that photography allows us to become what is it called, backwards looking prophets, right? In camera lucida. And I was wondering, and I just gave up trying to think about this film in that term, and I wonder whether we become backwards-looking prophets in some way. But I'm going to just throw that out there. I don't ask me to justify that claim. I think we can all have a think about that one afterwards. We may need a drink or two of some Vino Verdi to get the brain cells flowing on that one. But I think it is an elsewhere, and it's a future elsewhere. This is our future. This is a European future, yeah. And there are other elements like just very nice touches in Petzold. So he picks up Weidel's passport, for instance, which is on the desk, and you see this Deutsches Reich is written on that, and we think, whoa, this is a passport from the 1940s. What happened to the nice European Union purple ones that we so sadly in this country have just lost our entitlement to. But where does that come from? So there's this document from the past next to a typewriter, a technology from the past. And yet here we are with these French police in their body armor and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's totally disconcerting. And I think it's to the credit of Petzold's filmmaking that it's completely believable as well for us. So we actually feel that we are in this space, or I certainly had that feeling. The second thing you said about Benjamin's essay on Marseille, and I kind of skirt his essay on Marseille, but I think perhaps I need to go back to it. I got so excited about Moscow. I think I need to go back to the Marseille essay, because I think the thing that comes out of the Marseille essay for me, and there's a Marseille essay, and then there's the Hashish in Marseille as well, is that there is something about the intensification of experience in there. And when he describes, just being down with the sort of fish market or whatever it is, the stalls with the sort of the abundance of seafood and things like that, which gives you enormous description to. But he also talks about the smells. He talks about the sort of sensory experiences of the city. And so for Benjamin, sort of Marseille is a kind of revitalization of urban sensory experience, I think, like Naples as well. And I think all those sort of short pieces that he writes on cities are about that notion of the restoration of our sensitivity to things. And I would connect that. So I would connect that if we put that in the context of the sort of Zemalian indifference that the metropolitan experience is supposed to characterize, then Marseille is a kind of antidote to that, or a rekindling of our sensory experiences. And if that's the case, then I I think that that's very close to what Krakauer actually sees as a task of film, which is to restore our experiences, replenish our experiences in theory of film, redemption of physical reality. And I like that term, physical reality. People, a lot of Marxists complain that he was scared to use the term material reality, and so toned it down and calls it physical reality. I actually think he calls it physical reality for a very good reason, which is that it's to do with the body, and it's to do with the corporeal, and it's to do with the senses, and it's to do with not just visual experience, but physical experience as well. So if the Marseilles essay in Benjamin kind of is about the restoration of physical experiences and sensory experiences, and that's the task of film for Krakauer, then I think that's going to be an interesting loop back to this notion of film that Nelio was talking about, and the adventures that we might have within film. And that perhaps what this particular film does is reattune us to the city in some way, in a very curious way, by making, I mean, that's the sort of classic uncanny trope of defamiliarization, is to make us look at the city in a slightly new way, to look at it askew in some way. And looking at it askew, we start seeing maybe other aspects of it, thinking about it differently, thinking about it in new ways, thinking about it perhaps in terms of things like fear, for instance, thinking about it in terms of threat, thinking about it in terms of this very everyday, banal, mundane Marseille cityscape with people going around on little scooters, walking around the city. There's a really interesting moment. Watching the film again, I watched it again last night. Really interesting moments which are suddenly interjected into the film, and then we move on and are not repeated. So there's a moment immediately before Gilloch first encounters Marie. He's looking at a map of the city, a kind of public map out sort of like by a subway station or something. And suddenly we get a black and white image of him as if from a security camera. And then we go back and suddenly he's tapped on the shoulder by Marie. And that's the only image that pops up suddenly of this security camera. I think, what on earth is going on there? Yeah, but this idea then of a different sort of filmmaking that's taking place continually, about scrutiny, about surveillance, about control, about about that panopticism, if I can use that term in a rather broad sense or banal sense even, but that the city is threatening, is disturbing, is a place of fear and peril and danger. That intensification of experience, I think, is what this film is trying to convey to us, that we actually experience this as a game of cat and mouse, and we are very much the mouse in this. Which leads on to the final thing you said about the beautiful blue skies and the sunshine. And you called it a solar city, which I think is absolutely spot on. I think Lefebvre talks about solar cities, and he doesn't mention Marseille, but I think he plans in rhythm analysis for a study of a solar city. He said, I think it was about Marseille in a work that he never completed. I love the American writer Mike Davis in his book City of Quartz from 1992, something like that, study of Los Angeles, the history of Los Angeles, has this lovely term for it, which is sunshine and noir, which he says is the basis of the sort of Californian Los Angeles film, becomes the basis of film industry in Los Angeles. Sunshine and noir, I think, is the bright sunshine of the Mediterranean, and precisely this sense of threat. Marseille is the perfect setting for this combination, I think. And it's something that I've been drawn to more and more. I don't know if any of you know the work of Jean-Claude Izzo, IZZ. Oh, I'm not sure if I can put something in the chat. Let's see, Jean-Claude Izzo. The writer that I'm really interested in, who writes the Marseilles trilogy, which is a noir trilogy, and has a fascination with Marseille, and I think there's some really Marseille has that sort of sense of the port city, of people moving through, of danger, of seediness, of corruption, bribery, drugs, traffic, illegality, which Isso captures really brilliantly in his work. So yeah, I think Marseille is it's a city I've never been to.
Me neither.
And maybe we should organize a project trip there when things relax, because I think it would be an amazing experience. Interesting. I mean, I'll just say two more things I think about that. One is the connection with Lisbon, actually. Yes. Seghers in a book says that Marseille is the end of Europe, and then just an aside, like Lisbon, right?
Like Lisbon, of course.
which is nice, and obviously there's a connection with the Lisbon plain in Casablanca as well as the two entry points into Europe at the end of the world. She describes Lisbon and Marseille as. The other is that Seghers' book, there's a kind of third level to all these time catastrophes, and that is that Seghers' book, the novel itself, endlessly appeals to sort of mythology and the antique and classicism. The reference to the sort of spirits being recalled from the dead is a quote directly from the end of the novel, but it's peppered with other references to, above all, the figure of Odysseus, the figure of, another figure who's endlessly in transit, so to speak, another figure of who's continually moving and continually waiting to get home, homecoming, nostalgia in its literal sense of nostos, algae, longing for home, sickness for home. So there's a whole, and so this notion of the antique, which appears in Seghers' book, would be a kind of yet another series of time collisions. In a way, and I think that would actually dovetail really beautifully with Benjamin's work again on this notion of the antique, the most modern and the most antique as well coming together. So there's these multiple layers. One can become a kind of archaeologist in this film, I think, and looking at Marseille. So thanks for those ideas. That's fantastic.
And thank you so much for your answer. I got the feeling that we should build a new project around this film the possibilities. And I was thinking that we are used to the genre of science fiction, and maybe Petzold is creating a new genre like history fiction or something like that.
Yes.
Because it's also
you're absolutely right. It is that sort of I've seen there's a film version of 1984 that came out with John Hurt in the lead role. In fact, the reason it springs to mind is a new work that's coming out, which is a feminist retelling of 1984 from the perspective of Julia. And there was a film version of 1984 that came out, I think, in the mid-1980s, which actually then used it as from Orwell's own time. So it was a kind of 1984, but as in the 1940s, which also has this kind of time collision idea built into it, a future, looking back from the present, which is now the backwards looking prophet, I'm going to call it, aspect to it as well, which will be a kind of interesting thing to compare with this kind of what's going on here. But yeah, I like this idea of a sort of science fiction,
history fiction
play, historical futuristic play. Fantastic.
And just one more thing, we are now preparing the second series of our radio show, which is called Rua Sentido Único, in English.
One-way streets.
One-way street, yeah.
One-way street.
One-way streets in the plural, yes. So one of the episodes will be about imagined cities, and I think that I just earned a new topic for this episode with the Petzold, and we are definitely going to talk about this film there.
Fantastic, fantastic. That'd be great. Lovely.
More comments, more questions? The conversation has been very, very exciting for our project. Really, really. There are new approaches, and with this film, and with not equivocal but polytheistic conceptualization of the film. It is hard to make a synthesis with concepts which are not which do not have 2 or 3 senses. Beginning with transit, precisely. It's very interesting. Yeah. No,
I mean, for me, I suppose the starting point was I actually saw it at the cinema, kind of old style these days when the film first came out. So this paper's actually been kind of brewing for about 2-3 years, in actual fact, since I saw it. Because I saw the film and I thought, I was really so impressed by the film. I thought, okay, this is something I'm going to have to say something about. I'm going to have to write something about this and try and articulate some thoughts of it. And it kind of came together with the idea of Enter Fleeing, which is from One Way Street, and is actually my favorite piece from One Way Street. And it seemed to work in that context. What I couldn't get to work with, although it would be lovely if it could fit, is of course that Benjamin writes a piece in One Way Street called The Mexican Embassy, which is a very strange, dreamlike affair, and it would have maybe been too good if it would have been just if it fitted in somewhere into this film. But I'll go back to that and look at it again, because maybe with this new thinking about some of the ideas that you've mentioned here, like the gambler and dreamscape as well, which I think is also something that we can think about, that this city becomes a dreamscape in some way. And the figure of Marie is such a perplexing figure in this film. The way she comes and goes, as I said, for me it's like Nadia in Breton's eponymous work. So there's this sense in which this sense of sort of haunting spectres, ghosts, which are intensified in the novel, actually, very much because the spectre of Vidal seems to haunt the whole film, in actual fact, much more intensely than it does in the film version. So I think there's something about this that one can almost see the whole film as a kind of hallucination, almost. A hallucination in the start you could easily have just started and ended in the bar in Paris, for instance, and the whole film be one of those. The
city life of these cities, our cities also, provide good chances of hallucinations.
Yes.
Really.
Yeah. Which would also fit very nicely with sort of Benjamin and his own hashish experiences.
Yes, in Marseilles. Yes. And where he makes the most beautiful presentation of the aura there. Yes, very beautiful. Very beautiful.
Yeah.
Well,
I reminded myself when you were talking about solar cities, who can also be not solar city, but solar cities. We can bring Lisbon together to this group. I was just reminding myself of this film by Alain Tanner, Dans la Ville Blanche.
The White City.
The White City. And it's just
about Lisbon.
It's about Lisbon, and it's by Alain Tanner. It's about waiting. Also, it's sort of it's a completely different sort of type of waiting. It's not there isn't a historical element there, but it's all about waiting. It's a character, a sailor who ends up in Lisbon as a place of waiting and coming back. He comes here until the end of the world. He comes back. It's German in the case as well.
Bruno Ganz. It is Bruno Ganz.
Bruno Ganz.
Yeah.
Wow.
Alain Tanner is Swiss.
Yes.
From Switzerland.
Yeah.
And
he made the film here in Lisbon. All the film is turned here with a Portuguese actress, also very, very good.
Teresa Madruga.
Bruno Ganz was the main character. Yeah.
Ville Blanche.
Very good idea, because it makes it's a kind of different transit, really. But it's, as you mentioned, this kind of bipolarity of Lisbon and Marseille as at the end of the world. It would be very, very important to think the both films, not to make a good ensemble, but to discover the good differences, I think.
Yes. Because they're quite different, but since you brought something related to waiting, maybe different approaches, more existential, much more poetic.
And not historical, yes.
Not historical. But at the same time, there is a certain sense of ruin in the way that Alain Tanner approaches the city. So it's
ruin experience, yes.
Ruin experience, yes.
Yeah.
And the light of the film, the light of Dans la Ville Blanche, is completely different from this one, because the light is more porous, I think. There is some porosity in the light that he captures in the film, and it's darker in some sense. I think. Even though the film is Dans la Ville Blanche.
Yes.
I think this idea of waiting in these port cities, I think, is really, really interesting. And I will check out the White City Alain René film. It takes me back to Jean-Claude Izzo, who writes a book called The Lost Sailors, which is set in Marseille. He's from Marseille and writes exclusively about Marseille, as far as I can see, which is precisely about a ship that's actually stuck in Marseille harbour because it hasn't paid its various duties or whatever it is, and the company's now gone bust, and the ship can't leave, and so the sailors are stuck on board this ship, and they can't go anywhere. And of course, the main figure is a Greek sailor. The Odysseus parallels are kind of replayed, who then spends the entire novel basically walking around Marseille, visiting an old love, trying to find an old lover of his in the city. So this idea of being stuck, of waiting, of boredom, and filling in time as one gets trapped here through sort of bureaucratic mechanisms, because legal mechanisms, because no one can actually sort of pay off the debt so the ship can actually leave. But I think that this perhaps this is as we all find ourselves stuck in various places, people find themselves stuck for various reasons. This is a good moment to think about those moments of being trapped or stuck and waiting in urban spaces. I think that would be a really great little project, mini sub theme, maybe something for your one-way street of broadcasts.
Yes.
You are aware that there is an idea that is a wrong idea, but a strong idea, that Ulysses might have founded Lisbon, and the Latin word, the Latin name of Lisbon, Ulisipo, would be because it was founded by Ulysses, even though this is not true. It is interesting to think of the Odyssey and
the
Ulysses.
etymology of Lisbon. Yes, yes.
Yes.
I think that's true. I think that's true of Marseille as well. I think there's a myth that Marseille was founded by Odysseus. I mean, he got everywhere, obviously. So no, I didn't realize he'd actually got through right to the Atlantic as well. But yes. I think around the Mediterranean, there's probably just about every other city in the Mediterranean would claim that they were founded by Odysseus on those journeys. But I think that is a claim of Marseille as well. That's its mythological origins going back.
Mythological and poetic motif.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course Odysseus is hardly needs to be said, is a great figure of transit in that in that sense of being in transit, of traveling all the time but actually not getting anywhere at all, however much he hurries. Yeah, that's great. I will check out the Rene film. That sounds like a really wonderful film.
It's very beautiful. It's a very beautiful film. I'm sure you will we'll happy to see it. Yeah. Thank
you for that reference.
Well, now Alexandra, there are some of our colleagues that thank you very much, and they have already best regards to all, and they have enjoyed very much your lecture.
Great. Yeah. No, well, I'm so delighted that people have come, and I hope they've enjoyed the talk. And as I said, my one sadness is that we're not all together and able to go and have a little glass of wine.
Yes, in Lisbon. Yes.
Which would be really.
But perhaps next Frühling. I have forgotten the name in English. The Primavera.
Spring.
Spring.
Spring. We will see us. I don't know.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. I would definitely love to come to the summer conference.
The final conference. Yes.
In May, June. Yes, it's a very good time. Very good weather in this time. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking of solar cities as I look out at the sort of gloom of a Manchester evening, thinking that would be. I'm very envious. You have any sunshine there at all?